truth.
What's up, guys? Trevor here. I've heard countless Bigfoot stories over the years, most easy to dismiss, but every now and then one comes along that feels different, the kind that lingers. The encounters you're about to hear aren't just strange, they're deeply unsettling. Join me as we dive into the most horrifying Bigfoot encounters ever. Marie Christina Marquez, Tina to the people who knew her, is moving briskly along a trail that cuts through second-growth Douglas fir, somewhere in the foothills east of the Cascades. She has a day pack on her back, trekking poles in her hands, and the look of someone who has been out longer than she planned and wants to get home before dark. The trail cam catches her at a slight angle from above, mounted maybe 8 feet up on a cedar post, and in that first frame she looks completely ordinary. A woman on a hike, doing what hikers do, watching the trail ahead. But she isn't watching the trail ahead. She's watching what's behind her. And in those first few seconds of footage, that detail is everything. She turns twice in the span of maybe 30 seconds, not the casual glance of someone who heard a bird or a branch snap, the kind of look where she pivots her whole body, stops moving, and stares back down the trail for a solid 2 or 3 seconds each time. Bigfoot has already gotten her attention. Bigfoot has already reached into her nervous system and pulled a wire loose, and then the camera catches what she can't see yet. At the far left edge of the frame, barely visible in the tree line where the light is already failing, there is a shape that doesn't belong. Bigfoot is standing still among the firs, set back maybe 40 feet from the trail edge, and it is tall. Tall in a way that no black bear stands, tall in a way that no human being stands, tall in the particular way of something that has mass and height and presence all working together into a silhouette that makes the rational part of your brain throw its hands up and go quiet. Right from the first frame, something is off. The trail cams out in that area weren't installed to capture anything like this. They were monitoring deer movement patterns for a state wildlife survey. Whatever found Tina that evening was not supposed to be there. And yet here, Bigfoot is. She moves through the next section of trail at a pace that's climbing toward a jog without quite getting there. That particular human gear where your legs want to run, but your pride or your fear won't let them. The gear where you're trying to look composed while everything inside you is screaming. Could she keep this facade long enough to survive? The trail cam picks her up again about 60 yards further on, a second unit mounted near a creek crossing, and in this footage, the environmental context has shifted noticeably. The trees along this stretch have been worked over, not by wind, not by any weather event. Several of the smaller pines flanking the trail have had their lower bark stripped in long vertical patches, the exposed wood pale and raw against the dark forest floor, fresh enough that the cambium is still wet-looking in the footage. There are branches on the ground that didn't fall. Bigfoot snapped them cleanly from heights of 7 or 8 feet, the break points splintered in the way you get when something applies sudden downward force rather than the ragged tearing of weather damage. And in the mud along the creek bank, partially captured at the bottom of the frame, there are depressions in the ground that are unmistakably Bigfoot's footprints. The shape is humanoid. The size is not. Each impression is roughly 18 inches long and maybe 8 inches across at the ball of the foot, the toe marks pressed deep and individually distinct. Whatever made those tracks was heavy enough that it sank 2 inches into ground that Tina's own boots are barely marking. In the trail cam footage, I could see her notice the footprints. You can tell because she stops at the creek crossing for a moment, her poles going still, and she looks down at the bank with the frozen posture of someone whose brain is processing something that their worldview doesn't have a category for yet. She stands there for maybe 4 seconds. Then she steps across the creek and keeps moving, faster now, and she pulls something from her jacket pocket. Her phone. She holds it out ahead of her at chest height, not quite filming, not quite calling. Just holding it like a tether to something familiar, something that exists in the same world as cell towers and pizza delivery and people who would answer if she called. Will the comfort of technology be enough to keep her grounded? Her phone was recording audio the entire time. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this case, because what the audio captured in the stretch after the creek crossing is something that the trail cam footage alone can't fully communicate. The trail cams give you the visual, the shape of what happened, the geography of it, the terrible spatial logic. But the audio gives you the texture, the atmosphere. It gives you what Tina was actually inside of. The sounds start low. They're easy to miss under the ambient noise of the creek fading behind her and her own footfalls on the trail. But they're there, a subsonic pressure more than a sound, the kind of frequency that a human chest cavity registers as unease before the ears process it as a noise at all. Then it sharpens into something identifiable. Bigfoot's rhythmic guttural vocalization coming from the tree line to her left, low and deliberate, with a cadence that is nothing like any wildlife call that has a clean scientific explanation. It repeats. Not randomly, it repeats with the consistency of something communicating, spacing each utterance with what sounds like intentional pause, like punctuation. And then, from further away and to her right, a different voice answers it. Lower in register, longer in duration, with a resonant quality that the phone's microphone clearly struggles with, clipping at the peaks of each exhalation. Two distinct vocalizations, two distinct sources. She is between them. Notice how precise the movement is on the footage at this point. The trail cam northeast of the creek crossing, the third unit in the sequence, shows Bigfoot emerging from the tree line behind her. Not charging, not thrashing through the brush, but moving with a measured, quiet deliberateness along the edge of the trail, maybe 30 feet back and closing slowly. The creature's gait is long and unhurried. It isn't chasing her, it's pacing her. There's a difference, and the footage makes that difference absolutely clear. Bigfoot isn't trying to catch Tina. Bigfoot is steering her. She tries to fight the noise. That's what you have to understand about what comes next. Tina isn't passive in this footage. She's not frozen or hysterical. She picks up a fallen branch from the trail edge, something maybe 3 feet long and wrist thick, and she starts banging it against the trunk of a tree as she walks. A rhythmic, sharp crack over and over, the sound carrying through the trees in all directions. The audio on her phone makes this thunderous and immediate, each impact clean and hard. It's a reasonable instinct. Noise deters most wildlife, disrupts their comfort zone, gives you the psychological initiative. For a bear or a cougar, it probably works most of the time. But what if this instinct backfires entirely? For Bigfoot, it accomplishes the opposite. The trail cam footage is unambiguous on this point. The moment Tina starts banging the branch, the creature behind her closes the distance by roughly 10 feet in the span of a few seconds. Not running, not startled into aggression, just adjusting its pace the way you would if someone ahead of you on a street suddenly slowed down. The vocalizations from the audio respond to the answering call from her right flank becoming more frequent, the intervals between utterances shortening. She's ringing a dinner bell. She's marking her location with a precision that renders her impossible to lose. And when she bangs again, louder this time, putting real force into it. The footage shows Bigfoot stepping fully onto the trail behind her, into the open, no longer bothering with the tree line. Every warning she tries to make, yelling, banging, seems to draw them closer. You can almost feel the panic shifting in her, the animal part of her brain beginning to override the rational response. Because what do you do when every instinct you have turns out to be exactly wrong? She finds the rock outcrop at 6:11 p.m., according to the trail cam timestamp. It rises off the right side of the trail like a small natural fortress, maybe 12 feet of tilted granite ledge with enough handholds to climb and enough elevation to give her a vantage point, a defensible position. You can see her calculating it. She hesitates for only a second at the base, then she commits, jamming her trekking poles through the straps of her daypack to free her hands and going at the rock face with a speed and efficiency that speaks to experience. Someone who has climbed before, someone who knows what her body can do. She gets 7 or 8 feet up in about 10 seconds, and for a brief moment, maybe 3 seconds, she's above it all. Her head swings around, scanning the forest floor, breathing hard but moving well. Bigfoot reaches the base of the outcrop before she makes it to the top. The footage here is the most physically confrontational sequence in the entire recording, and it is difficult to watch with any detachment whatsoever. The creature, moving with a speed that is startling relative to everything that's come before, a sudden gear change from that measured pace into something decisive and fast, closes the distance to the rock face and reaches. up to close a hand around her left ankle. The grip is enough to arrest her upward movement completely, dead stopping a woman who was moving with momentum, and then she is pulled downward, not with wild violence, but with an irresistible steady force, back toward the ground. She swings the trekking pole she managed to pull from her pack, and it connects. The footage shows the pole whipping through a thick mass of dark hair, and the audio carries the impact. But Bigfoot doesn't release her, doesn't flinch in any meaningful way. She lands hard at the base of the outcrop, stumbles, gets her feet back under her, and that's when she sees the second one. And there it is, 2 of them. The footage makes this crystal clear, coordinated, intelligent behavior, executed with a fluency that implies not just instinct, but planning. They aren't animals that happen to converge on the same location. The positioning is tactical. How do you react when the danger doubles in an instant? The second Bigfoot is above her. It had apparently moved to the high end of the outcrop while the first was below, and it stands at the top of the granite ledge now, blocking any upward route with a mass and presence that makes the rock face suddenly meaningless as an escape option. 7 feet tall at minimum, maybe more. The trail cam angle makes precise estimation difficult, but the scale against the surrounding trees is unmistakable. The creature stands without urgency, without the aggressive display you'd expect from a territorial animal, without anything that looks like fear or excitement. It just stands there, occupying the high ground, and watches her. The effect on Tina is immediate and total. She backs away from the outcrop, and in backing away, she moves exactly where the terrain wants her to go, back onto the main trail. And then, because Bigfoot on the trail behind her has resumed that slow, measured approach, she turns onto the narrower branch trail that cuts to the left. She takes it fast, breaking into an actual run now, trekking pole swinging, and the audio fills with the sound of her breathing, raw and ragged, the kind of breathing that comes when the body has committed everything to movement. The narrow trail curves to the left in a long arc. It is, though she doesn't know this yet, a loop trail, a natural cul-de-sac that curves back on itself in a roughly half-mile arc and deposits you exactly where you entered it. There is no exit at the far end. It is, in the most brutal possible sense, a trap. And whether or not Bigfoot knew that, whether or not the intelligence at work here included a spatial understanding of that trail system, the 2 creatures are now positioned precisely to take advantage of it. Could she realize the trap before it closes completely around her? The loop trail has 3 trail cams on it, originally placed to monitor elk movement through the corridor, and what they collectively capture over the next 11 minutes is the most complete and most harrowing sequence in the entire footage record. Tina moves through the corridor at a pace that oscillates between full run and stumbling jog, catching herself on roots and rocks, losing a trekking pole somewhere in the first quarter mile, her day pack shifted half off one shoulder. The loop itself is roughly half a mile end to end, curving in a tight arc through old-growth fir and hemlock, the trail surface uneven, with decades of root growth heaving the dirt into ridges and hollows that are manageable at a walking pace and treacherous at a run. The forest in here is denser than the main trail, the canopy lower, the light almost entirely gone now. The trail cams have switched to infrared, rendering everything in flat silver-white gradients that give the footage an additional layer of unreality, like something recorded in a different dimension entirely. Bigfoot moves through it on both sides, not on the trail. Parallel to it, maybe 20 feet into the trees on each flank, visible on the trail cam footage as large, heat-radiating shapes moving steadily through the underbrush with a silence that seems impossible given their mass. The audio catches the occasional shift of weight on the forest floor, the sound of something large displacing brush, but no crashing, no snapping of branches, no noise that would give away position or distance. They are quieter than she is. They are faster than she is moving. And they are on both sides, maintaining spacing, neither closing nor falling back, simply keeping pace and containing the corridor. It's terrifying, she's moving faster, but the loop doesn't give her a way out. The camera angles capture this like a predator's choreography, every position deliberate, every interval maintained. What you're watching is a system working exactly as intended. Can she outthink a plan that seems smarter than a human mind? She realizes the trail is looping back at the 6:19 p.m. mark. You can tell because she slows suddenly, and the way she slows is different from exhaustion. It's the slowing of comprehension, of a terrible realization landing. She would have recognized the terrain, a particular bent cedar or a rock formation she'd passed 8 minutes earlier, and understood in that moment what the geography meant. The audio goes quiet except for her breathing, which has dropped from the frantic rhythm of full exertion to something more controlled, more careful, and somehow more frightening for it. She stops completely, stands in the middle of the trail, looks left and looks right, looks back the way she came. The shapes in the tree line on both sides have also stopped, those enormous heat signatures going still in the infrared, patient and absolute. The audio picks up the vocalization again, the low guttural call, and this time it comes from very close, maybe 15 feet into the trees to her left, close enough that the phone's microphone captures a texture to it, a chest resonance, a warmth of proximity. She turns toward it. Bigfoot steps partially into the trail corridor from the right flank, visible at the edge of infrared range, and she pivots to face that instead. The first Bigfoot materializes at the back of the corridor behind her, the entry point of the loop, blocking the only route back to the main trail. The second moves in from the right, closing the gap between its previous position and the trail edge with the same calm deliberateness that has characterized every movement throughout this footage. She is in the center of a triangle that is contracting steadily, with no seam she can find and no gap she can force open. She starts moving again, forward, toward the loop exit back to the main trail, the only geometry that makes any sense. And she is moving fast, but the roots in this section of trail are thick and interlocking, and the infrared footage turns the ground into a high-contrast maze of light and shadow that conceals depth. She trips. Not a stumble she catches herself from. A full, committed fall, both hands hitting the ground, her chin narrowly missing a root, her day pack swinging forward over her head and dumping onto the trail in front of her. The audio records the impact, and then a sound from her that is not a scream exactly, more like the involuntary expulsion of air that comes when fear becomes physical, when the body finally accepts what the mind has been trying to process. She gets one hand under herself, starts to push up, and Bigfoot is already there. The first creature reaches her in 2 strides from somewhere. The camera barely captured it approaching. The speed is shocking after so much patience. The same gear change that happened at the rock outcrop, from stillness to decisive motion without any intermediate step. One large hand comes down on her upper back with a pressure that pins her to the trail without the force of a strike, the kind of controlled application of weight that is more frightening than violence would be because it is precise. She struggles, twisting at the waist, swinging her remaining trekking pole one-handed, and the audio carries her voice now. Words, not just sounds. Words directed at the creature above her, the specific words indistinct under the ambient noise, but the cadence of them clear. A sustained attempt to communicate, to reach something in the intelligence she had clearly, by this point, accepted was there. Could communication work when survival depends on submission? The second Bigfoot approaches from the front. It moves to the day pack that has spilled onto the trail ahead of her, and it does something that stops the breath in anyone who has ever watched this footage for the first time. It reaches into the pack, not randomly, not with the chaotic investigation of an animal going through human belongings for food. It searches with a purpose. It moves aside the water bottle, the first aid kit, the rain shell, and it finds, or more accurately, retrieves, as if it knew exactly what it was looking for, the length of the paracord that Tina had stored in a side pocket of the pack, standard hiking gear, 30 feet of braided nylon cord, the kind of thing any experienced hiker carries. Bigfoot draws it out, examines it for barely a second, and moves toward her. You can see the intelligence here, using the rope. They're handling her like they've done this before, or at the very least, like they understand the concept of restraint. That's the part that I can't stop thinking about. Not the strength, not the size, the understanding. The binding takes less time than you would expect. The second Bigfoot works at her wrists first, while the first maintains the pressure on her back, and though she struggles, the audio is full of the sounds of it, the friction of cord on ground, the impact of her feet against the trail as she tries to push herself forward. The outcome is not in doubt from the moment it begins. Her wrists are secured behind her, then her ankles. She is moved, carefully without roughness, with a handling that is almost methodical in its gentleness relative to the force that preceded it. to the base of a large Douglas fir at the edge of the trail. The final trail cam in the loop sequence catches this in full infrared. Tina sitting with her back against the tree, her bound wrists behind her, her legs extended and bound at the ankle. Both Bigfoot creatures are standing over her, still looking down. She is still talking. The audio catches it, her voice steady now in a way that sounds less like calm and more like the particular mental state you reach when panic has run its full course and the body simply doesn't have the resources to maintain it anymore. The words are still mostly indistinct, but the delivery is measured, deliberate, the cadence of someone who has decided that communication is the only remaining option and is committing to it completely. One of the creatures responds. The audio captures it clearly. The low vocalization, close, directed downward toward where she is sitting, different in character from the territorial calls that punctuated the earlier footage. Less loud, but more considered. She responds to it. It responds to her. This exchange, if that's what it is, and I believe that's what it is, lasts for approximately 40 seconds. Is dialogue enough when danger towers over you? The trail cam cuts out at 6:31 p.m. Not a slow fade, not a low battery shutdown sequence, an abrupt, instantaneous end to the recording as if the power supply was physically interrupted. The footage simply stops. One frame there is the infrared image. The tree, Tina tied against it, the two massive shapes of Bigfoot standing over her in the flat silver light. The next frame is nothing. The camera never recorded again. Her phone was found 6 days later in her abandoned day pack, recovered from the loop trail by a search and rescue team working the area after she was reported missing. Tina Marquez was never found.
Somebody over there. They're supposed to be in our woods.
In November 2020, veteran hunter Thaddeus Ravenclaw was tracking elk in the remote Blackmore Mountains when he witnessed something that revealed the horrifying truth about decades of missing hunters in the region. On his third day hunting, approximately 8 miles from base camp, Thaddeus noticed the forest had become unnaturally quiet. Against his better judgment, Thaddeus investigated, positioning himself behind a fallen log on a ridge overlooking a small valley. Through his rifle scope, Thaddeus saw another hunter moving through the forest below. Everything appeared normal, but Thaddeus could see what the hunter couldn't. Something massive stalking him from the tree line. The creature moved with fluid grace between the shadows, standing at least 11 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they filled spaces between trees. It demonstrated predatory precision that spoke to years of experience hunting human prey, matching the hunter's pace exactly, studying patterns, waiting for the optimal moment to strike. The stalking was methodical and calculated. The creature matched the hunter's pace exactly, maintaining consistent distance. When the hunter paused, it paused. When he changed direction, it adjusted accordingly. This wasn't animal behavior. This was calculated predation by an intelligence that understood human psychology and behavior patterns with terrifying sophistication. The creature studied its prey with the patience of a master predator, learning patterns and waiting for the optimal moment to strike. It moved ahead of the hunter, positioning itself to observe from multiple angles. It wasn't just following, it was herding, subtly influencing the hunter's path toward some predetermined kill zone where the attack would be most effective. Most disturbing was the creature's obvious tactical intelligence. It considered wind direction, terrain advantages, escape routes, and optimal attack positions with military-level strategic planning. This suggested extensive practice on human subjects, refining its methods through systematic predation conducted over many years of hunting human beings in these remote mountains. The creature's size alone was terrifying. Through his scope, Thaddeus could see that it stood at least 11 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the spaces between trees. Its arms were disproportionately long, hanging down past its knees and ending in hands that appeared capable of crushing human bones like twigs. The creature's entire physiology seemed designed for violence, every aspect of its anatomy optimized for the systematic destruction of human life. At 2:15 p.m., the attack began. The hunter had stopped in a clearing to examine tracks when the creature emerged from the tree line with explosive speed that defied its massive size. Thaddeus got his first clear view of the attacker, a bipedal nightmare covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The creature's face was a horrifying amalgamation of human and beast, with features that suggested intelligence but were twisted by malevolence and an insatiable hunger for violence. Its eyes burned with an awareness that was unmistakably conscious, calculating, and utterly without mercy. The intelligence behind those eyes was ancient and malevolent, focused entirely on causing maximum suffering to its human prey. The creature's mouth was filled with teeth that were designed not just for killing, but for the systematic dismantling of its victims while they were still alive. The teeth were arranged in rows like a shark's, but they were larger and more varied in shape, suggesting different functions for different types of tissue destruction. Some were designed for cutting, others for grinding, and still others for the precise extraction of specific anatomical components. The hunter had no time to react. The creature struck with tremendous force, sending him flying across the clearing like a child's toy. The impact was so violent that Thaddeus could hear the sound of breaking bones even from his position 300 yards away. The hunter's rifle was torn from his hands and thrown deep into the forest, leaving him completely defenseless against his attacker. Thaddeus found himself frozen in absolute terror. His body refused to respond to his mind's desperate commands to move, to run, to do anything. He could only watch in paralyzed horror as the nightmare unfolded before him. His hunting instincts, honed by decades of experience, screamed at him to flee, but his muscles had turned to stone, leaving him trapped in his own body as a helpless witness to unspeakable horror. The creature didn't kill immediately. Instead, it began systematic assault that demonstrated both intelligence and sadistic pleasure in causing suffering. The creature grabbed the hunter by his legs and began swinging him against nearby trees, using the man's body as a weapon against the forest itself. Each impact was calculated to cause maximum damage while keeping the victim alive and conscious for as long as possible. The sounds that emerged from the clearing were unlike anything Thaddeus had ever heard. The hunter's screams were not just expressions of pain, they were sounds of absolute terror, the vocalizations of someone who had realized that death would not come quickly or mercifully. The screams echoed across the valley, creating haunting sounds that seemed to energize the creature and drive it to greater heights of violence. Thaddeus watched, unable to move, unable to look away, as the creature's face showed obvious pleasure at the sounds of breaking bones and agonized screams. It would pause between impacts, tilting its massive head as if listening to the hunter's screams with the appreciation of a connoisseur. The creature seemed to be savoring the sounds of suffering, taking time to appreciate the fear in its victim's eyes before continuing the systematic destruction of his body. The systematic nature was most disturbing. The creature wasn't acting on instinct or hunger. It was deliberately prolonging suffering, taking obvious pleasure in terror and pain. Each impact was calculated to cause maximum damage while keeping the victim conscious as long as possible. This was not random violence. It was systematic torture conducted by an intelligence that understood exactly what it was doing. After several minutes of this brutal assault, the creature changed tactics. It threw the hunter to the ground and began systematically breaking bones with its massive hands, starting with the man's fingers and working its way up his arms. The creature's movements were deliberate and methodical, suggesting extensive experience with this type of torture. Thaddeus's hands shook violently as he tried to process what he was witnessing, but his body remained frozen in place. The creature's hands were perfectly adapted for this work. Its fingers ended in claws that were sharp enough to pierce flesh, but controlled enough to avoid causing immediate death. The creature demonstrated surgical precision in its torture, breaking bones in specific sequences that would maximize pain while preventing shock or unconsciousness. The creature's hands were perfectly designed for systematic torture. Each finger was tipped with a claw that could be used with surgical precision, capable of making cuts that would cause maximum pain without causing fatal blood loss. The creature's grip strength was tremendous, allowing it to apply exactly the right amount of pressure to break bones without crushing them completely. The hunter's screams grew weaker as shock and blood loss began to take their toll, but the creature seemed to understand exactly how to keep its victim conscious and aware of what was happening. It would pause periodically, allowing the hunter to recover slightly before continuing its systematic destruction of his body. During these pauses, the creature would examine its work with obvious satisfaction, flexing the broken limbs and testing the damage it had caused. The creature took particular pleasure in the unnatural angles at which the bones now bent. It would manipulate the broken limbs, creating new configurations of damage and studying the hunter's reactions to different types of pain. The creature was not just torturing its victim, it was conducting experiments, learning about human anatomy and pain tolerance through direct observation and systematic experimentation. Thaddeus watched in paralyzed horror as the creature demonstrated knowledge of human anatomy that would be impressive in a medical professional, but was terrifying in a predator. The creature knew exactly which bones to break first, which nerve centers to target, which cuts would cause maximum pain without fatal blood loss. The level of anatomical expertise was disturbing in its implications. The torture continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 to 40 minutes. The creature had developed specific techniques for different types of torture, breaking bones in particular sequences, positioning the victim to maximize both pain and consciousness duration. The level of refinement suggested years of practice on human subjects, perfecting methods through extensive experimentation. The creature's methods were varied and sophisticated. It would twist limbs until joints dislocated, apply pressure to nerve centers to create waves of agony, and use its claws to make precise cuts that would cause maximum pain without causing fatal blood loss. The creature demonstrated knowledge of human anatomy that suggested it had been studying human physiology through direct experimentation for many years. Throughout this prolonged torture, Thaddeus remained frozen in his hiding spot, his mind screaming at his body to move, to help, to do something, but his muscles refused to respond. He was trapped in his own paralyzed body, forced to witness every horrific detail of the systematic destruction taking place below. His rifle lay useless in his hands, too far away to be effective even if he could overcome his paralysis. The creature seemed to understand exactly how much damage it could inflict without causing immediate death. It knew which bones to break first, which nerve centers to target, which cuts would cause maximum pain without fatal blood loss. The level of expertise was terrifying in its implications, suggesting that this creature had been perfecting its torture methods through extensive practice on human victims. The creature began experimenting with different torture methods, testing the hunter's responses to various types of trauma. It would apply pressure to specific points on the body, watching with clinical interest as the victim's reactions provided data about human pain thresholds and anatomical vulnerabilities. The systematic nature of this experimentation was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of what Thaddeus witnessed. The creature wasn't simply causing pain, it was conducting research, gathering information about human physiology through direct observation and experimentation on a living subject. The creature would create specific types of injuries, then pause to study the effects, taking mental notes about which methods produced the most interesting results. The creature demonstrated knowledge that went far beyond instinctive predation. It understood human anatomy with the precision of a surgeon, knowing exactly which injuries would cause specific types of pain, which damage would be temporary versus permanent, and how to maintain consciousness despite extreme trauma. This level of knowledge could only have been acquired through extensive practice on human subjects. As the torture continued, the creature began to vary its methods, testing different approaches to see which produced the most interesting results. It would break bones in new patterns, apply pressure to different nerve clusters, and create injuries that interacted with each other to produce compound effects. The hunter's body became a canvas for the creature's experimentation. The creature's approach to torture was methodical and scientific, suggesting that it had been refining its techniques through extensive practice on human subjects over many years. Each movement was purposeful, each injury carefully calculated to provide specific information about human physiology and pain tolerance. The creature was building a comprehensive understanding of human suffering through systematic torture. Thaddeus watched in horror as the creature began to focus on specific anatomical systems, testing the limits of human endurance in different areas of the body. It would spend long minutes working on individual limbs, studying the effects of different types of damage with the dedication of a researcher conducting important experiments. The creature's torture techniques were sophisticated and refined. It knew how to break bones in ways that would cause maximum pain, how to dislocate joints to create specific types of agony, and how to use its claws to make cuts that would interact with broken bones to produce compound pain effects. The level of sophistication suggested years of practice and refinement. The creature seemed to take particular interest in the hunter's reactions to different types of pain. It would pause after each new injury to study the victim's face, watching for specific responses that would provide information about the effectiveness of different torture methods. The creature was learning, gathering data that would make it even more effective in future attacks. The systematic nature of the experimentation was terrifying in its implications. The creature wasn't just torturing for pleasure, it was conducting research that would improve its methods and make future attacks even more horrific. Each victim was providing data that would be used to refine the creature's techniques and make subsequent tortures more effective. After an eternity of systematic torture and experimentation, the creature began the final phase of its attack. It grabbed the hunter's head in its massive hands and began applying pressure, slowly crushing the skull while the victim remained alive and aware. The hunter's final screams were cut short as his skull collapsed under the tremendous force applied by the creature's powerful hands. The skull-crushing sound was audible even at Thaddeus's distance, a wet, grinding noise that spoke of tremendous pressure being applied to bone and brain tissue. The creature held the crushed skull for several moments, seeming to savor the moment of death before finally releasing its grip. The creature's face showed an expression of satisfaction and completion, as if it had achieved some important goal. But the horror wasn't over. The creature began a grotesque post-mortem ritual that revealed the true fate of all the missing hunters. The creature systematically dismantled the body, breaking bones and tearing flesh with methodical precision. It consumed some parts immediately, gnawing on bones to extract marrow while the blood was still fresh, creating sounds that echoed across the valley. The feeding behavior was not random or instinctive. The creature selected specific parts of the body, consuming them in a particular order that suggested ritual significance. It would pause between feeding to examine the remaining corpse, as if planning the next phase of its consumption according to some predetermined protocol that had been developed through years of practice. Thaddeus watched in paralyzed revulsion as the creature demonstrated anatomical knowledge that went far beyond simple predation. It knew which organs to consume first, which bones contained the most marrow, which parts of the body would provide the most nutritional value. The creature's feeding was efficient and systematic, suggesting that it had developed these techniques through extensive practice on human victims. The creature's feeding was accompanied by sounds that Thaddeus would never forget: the crack of bones being broken, the wet tearing of flesh, and a low rumbling that might have been the creature's expression of satisfaction. The sounds carried across the valley, creating an audio landscape that belonged in the deepest circles of hell rather than any earthly forest. The most disturbing aspect of this post-mortem ritual was the creature's obvious pleasure in its work. It would pause periodically to examine its handiwork, seeming to take satisfaction in the destruction it had caused. This wasn't simple feeding behavior. It was a celebration of violence conducted by an intelligence that understood exactly what it was doing and took pride in its achievements. The creature gathered the remaining bones and body parts, loading them into a crude sack made from animal hide. The creature was collecting trophies, taking parts of its victim back to some unknown location where they would join the remains of all the other missing hunters. The sack itself was disturbing in its implications, clearly handmade and stitched together with what appeared to be sinew or dried intestines. The creature had crafted tools for its hunting activities, suggesting a level of intelligence and planning that went far beyond simple animal behavior. The sack was not the only tool the creature possessed. Thaddeus could see other implements hanging from its belt, crude but effective devices that had been designed for specific aspects of hunting and processing human prey. Then came the methodical evidence elimination. The creature systematically eliminated all evidence of what had occurred. It scattered the hunter's gear across a wide area, buried some items, and threw others into dense undergrowth where they would never be found. The creature understood the importance of concealing its activities, suggesting intelligence that went far beyond simple animal cunning. Most disturbing of all was the creature's methodical approach to evidence elimination. It used branches to obscure bloodstains on the ground, moved rocks to cover disturbed earth, and even rearranged vegetation to make the clearing appear undisturbed. The creature understood human search methods and was taking specific steps to ensure that no evidence of its activities would be discovered. The creature's knowledge of human behavior was extensive and terrifying. It knew how search teams operated, what they looked for, and how to eliminate the specific types of evidence that would lead to discovery. This suggested that the creature had been observing human activities for years, learning their methods and developing countermeasures that would allow it to continue its predation without detection. Within 2 hours of the attack, the clearing showed no obvious signs of what had transpired. The creature had removed the body, scattered the evidence, and transformed the scene of brutal murder into what appeared to be an ordinary forest clearing. Any search team that investigated the area would find nothing to indicate what had happened to the missing hunter. As the creature finished its work, it slowly turned and looked directly toward Thaddeus's hiding spot. For a terrifying moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, their eyes met across the distance. The creature's gaze held unmistakable intelligence, aware, calculating, and utterly without mercy. In that moment of eye contact, Thaddeus realized with absolute certainty that the creature had been aware of his presence throughout the entire attack. It had allowed him to witness its work, perhaps even performed for his benefit, demonstrating its methods and capabilities to someone who would carry the knowledge of its existence back to the human world. The creature's eyes seemed to bore into his soul, evaluating him with the same clinical detachment it had shown while torturing its victim. Thaddeus could see the intelligence behind those eyes, making a decision about whether to add him to its collection or allow him to escape with the knowledge of what he had witnessed. That moment of recognition broke Thaddeus's paralysis like a gunshot. Pure, primal terror flooded his system, overriding the shock that had kept him frozen for the past 2 hours. His body finally responded to his mind's desperate commands, and he exploded from his hiding spot in blind panic, crashing through the undergrowth without regard for stealth or safety. He crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his clothes and skin as he fled in absolute terror. Behind him, he could hear the creature's roar of rage, a sound that seemed to shake the very mountains, and spoke of fury at having its prey escape. The sound was unlike anything in nature, a vocalization that combined animal rage with intelligent frustration. The sound of massive footsteps thundered behind him, each impact seeming to shake the ground beneath his feet. The creature was pursuing him with the same methodical precision it had shown in its attack, but now there was urgency in its movements, anger at being denied another victim for its collection of human trophies. Thaddeus ran with superhuman speed, born of pure terror, crashing through dense forest without regard for the branches that tore at his flesh or the rocks that bruised his feet. He could hear the creature behind him, its breathing like a steam engine, its footsteps getting closer with each passing second. The creature's pursuit was relentless and methodical. As he crashed through a particularly dense thicket, Thaddeus caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run even colder. Through the trees to his left, another massive form was moving parallel to his path. At first, he thought it might be another tree or a large boulder, but as his terror-sharpened vision focused, he realized with absolute horror that it was another creature. This second creature was similar in size and build to his pursuer, but it wasn't participating in the chase. Instead, it was simply watching, moving through the forest with the same fluid grace, but maintaining a consistent distance. The creature's posture suggested casual observation rather than active hunting, as if it were merely a spectator to the deadly game unfolding in the forest. The realization that there were multiple creatures in these mountains hit Thaddeus like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated predator. This was evidence of a population, a community of these nightmarish beings that had been systematically hunting human beings in the remote wilderness areas. The implications were staggering and terrifying beyond comprehension. The watching creature's behavior suggested a social structure among these beings. It wasn't interfering with the hunt, respecting what appeared to be territorial boundaries or hunting protocols. The creature seemed content to observe, perhaps learning from the techniques being employed by its companion, or simply enjoying the spectacle of human terror and desperation. As Thaddeus continued his desperate flight, he could see the watching creature keeping pace through the trees, its massive form moving with the same silent efficiency that characterized these beings. The creature's eyes were visible even at distance, burning with the same intelligent malevolence that had characterized his pursuer. But there was also something that might have been amusement in its gaze. The presence of the second creature added a new dimension of terror to Thaddeus's flight. Not only was he being hunted by one of these nightmarish beings, but he was also being observed by another, as if his desperate attempt to escape was providing entertainment for these ancient predators. The psychological impact of being watched while fleeing for his life was almost as terrifying as the physical pursuit itself. The watching creature's behavior suggested that these beings had developed complex social behaviors around their predation of human beings. There were apparently rules and protocols governing their hunts, territorial boundaries that were respected, and perhaps even hierarchies that determined which creature had the right to pursue specific prey. The pursuit seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. Thaddeus's lungs burned, his legs screamed in agony, but the terror of what was behind him and what was watching from the side drove him forward beyond the limits of human endurance. He could feel both creatures' presence like physical weights, pressing against his consciousness and filling him with the absolute certainty that he was completely outmatched. Just when he thought the pursuing creature would catch him, when he could almost feel those claws tearing into his back, Thaddeus burst through a line of trees and found himself at the edge of a deep, fast-flowing river. The water was dark and cold, rushing between steep banks with a current that spoke of dangerous depths and hidden obstacles. Without hesitation, driven by pure survival instinct and the absolute certainty that the water offered his only chance of escape, Thaddeus launched himself into the churning water. The cold hit him like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and shocking his system. The current immediately grabbed him, pulling him downstream with tremendous force that threatened to dash him against the rocks. As he struggled to keep his head above water, fighting against the current that threatened to drag him under and drown him, Thaddeus looked back toward the riverbank. Both creatures now stood at the water's edge, their massive forms silhouetted against the darkening sky like primordial nightmares given physical form. The pursuing creature's eyes burned with frustrated rage, but neither creature made any attempt to enter the river. Whether they couldn't swim or simply chose not to pursue him into the water, Thaddeus would never know. But their reluctance to follow gave him hope for the first time since the nightmare began. Both creatures watched him with those calculating eyes as the current carried him downstream, their gazes never wavering even as the distance between them increased. There was something almost respectful in their observation, as if they acknowledged that their prey had earned its escape through courage and quick thinking rather than mere luck. The watching creature seemed to communicate something to the pursuer, though Thaddeus couldn't hear any sounds over the rushing water. The interaction between the two beings suggested a level of communication and social organization that was terrifying in its implications for human safety in these remote wilderness areas. Thaddeus fought against the current, using every ounce of his remaining strength to swim toward the opposite bank. The water was brutally cold, sapping his energy and threatening to drag him under with each passing moment. Several times he went under, swallowing mouthfuls of river water, but somehow he managed to keep fighting against the current that wanted to claim his life. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Thaddeus finally managed to grab hold of a fallen tree branch extending into the water from the opposite bank. Using the last of his strength, he hauled himself out of the river and collapsed on the muddy shore, gasping and shivering uncontrollably from cold and exhaustion. He lay there for a long time, too exhausted to move, too traumatized to think clearly about what he had witnessed. When he finally gathered the strength to look back across the river, both creatures were gone, vanished into the forest as silently as they had appeared, leaving no trace of their presence except for the horrific memories burned into Thaddeus's mind. Thaddeus spent the night huddled against a tree, too terrified to sleep, jumping at every sound the forest made around him. When dawn broke, he began walking downstream, following the river toward civilization. He was found 24 hours later by a search and rescue team, hypothermic, dehydrated, and in a state of severe psychological shock. The rescuers found him sitting by the riverbank, staring across the water with vacant eyes, muttering incoherently about multiple creatures in the forest. He was immediately airlifted to the nearest hospital, where doctors treated him for exposure and exhaustion, but the physical injuries were nothing compared to the psychological trauma. Thaddeus was no longer the confident, experienced hunter who had entered the mountains 3 days earlier. He had become something else, a broken man haunted by knowledge too terrible to share. His claims about multiple creatures were dismissed as hallucinations brought on by exposure and trauma. It was April 14, 2020, when the first known recording surfaced. The audio itself had been captured 3 days earlier during a routine camping weekend, but April 14th marked when a mirrored copy appeared online. The leak begins with the faint voice of a young child questioning something just outside the microphone's range, asking why a sound is being repeated back to her. There is no adult response. Only shallow breathing and low-frequency interference appear in the background, similar to early signal compression in low-end wearable devices. The clip ends at 54 seconds. However, the cloud log tied to the smartwatch shows a recorded duration of 1 minute and 12 seconds. 18 seconds are missing from the beginning of the file, trimmed before the audio reached the internet. The file is not marked as corrupted. It appears to have been manually edited. The recording didn't enter the internet through cryptid or conspiracy forums. Instead, it was uploaded to a small camping safety group by someone asking how to recover full smartwatch logs. It wasn't presented as unusual, just a technical question about incomplete runtime on a child safety recording. From there, a compressed screen recording was copied into a Discord channel dedicated to unexplained vocal mimicry in wildlife captures. Multiple versions appeared within hours, each labeled differently. Some called it a child safety alert. Others labeled it a Sasquatch voice capture. None of the file names match the original cloud entry. What is confirmed is limited. A child's smartwatch activated its auto-record function. A second audio source responded to her speech. 18 seconds from the start of the original log are missing. No full copy has been released. The incident took place in Ouachita National Forest, a region described in trail reports as both openly used and strangely unmonitored. The area sits between officially marked family campgrounds and overflow clearings that hikers use when main sites reach capacity. These unofficial lots have no full-time ranger presence. Only a seasonal host monitors road activity, logging plates and noting when camps appear occupied. Cellular reception is intermittent, cutting in and out depending on proximity to the ridgelines. Calls connect clearly from higher ground, but drop suddenly once paths slope toward the creek corridors. The forest has documented black bear presence, though no recent attack records exist for that zone. A few archived forum posts from 2012 reference unusual branch knock sounds and low echo vocalizations heard at dusk near older logging cuts. But those posts were mostly dismissed by users familiar with barred owl call variants, which can resemble rhythmic knocks when echoing through timber. The family registered under a standard weekend pass. A permit photo briefly circulated showing 3 first names, Karen, Michael, and Emily, before remaining fields were blurred in subsequent mirrors. The mother and stepfather arrived mid-afternoon according to time-stamped social media photographs. Emily, approximately 6 years old, wore a lightweight LTE-enabled smartwatch intended for child tracking and emergency signaling. The device used an auto SOS recording feature that activates when either a loud sound crosses a preset decibel threshold or when the child moves beyond a set distance boundary relative to a paired phone. Their tent was positioned close to the southeast tree line with a battery lantern hanging from a branch about 5 feet off the ground, casting a limited circle of light. Beyond that circle, terrain sloped downward into a shallow ridge break, where pine needle buildup created a soft floor with almost no leaf crunch. 2 other families had set up camp within view, separated by roughly 120 to 150 yards, though their lantern light didn't reach the tree line. This spatial layout would later allow online map overlays to approximate Emily's movement direction relative to the audio source. The smartwatch was a commercially available unit marketed to parents of young children. It stores emergency recordings in segmented files, each capped at 2 minutes unless manually canceled. The auto record feature doesn't stop immediately when the triggering sound or motion ceases. It runs until either the user taps the screen, a stable signal is re-established, or the device's motion algorithm classifies movement as resumed safe proximity. Analysts noted that the missing 18-second portion was unlikely due to automatic timeout and more consistent with manual trimming or export limits. Emily's play radius extended slightly beyond the lantern's reach. No barrier existed, and soft pine duff masked footsteps. In later 3D map reconstructions, this silence suggested she moved no more than 30 to 40 yards beyond visible light, far enough for Karen and Michael to lose direct sight, but still within assumed safety boundaries. Scattered hiking logs noted that the area experiences temperature inversion pockets at night, causing sound to carry unevenly. Voices travel clearly downslope while remaining muffled when calling from below. Some early comments beneath the leaked audio referenced this, suggesting the parents might have been calling for Emily while she remained only partially able to hear them. As with most remote forest pull-offs, no permanent surveillance monitored the site. The only digital record came from devices the family brought, a smartphone with inconsistent signal and the smartwatch that triggered automatically. In the absence of external feeds, the smartwatch audio became the primary data point for what happened beyond the lantern's reach. The first automatic recording begins at 2021, according to the device log, triggered when Emily crossed the distance boundary threshold. She steps just beyond the lantern's visible range. The smartwatch registers a brief accelerometer shift, consistent with gentle slope descent, followed by reduced ambient noise. The audio profile shows only footstep friction against soft duff and light fabric movement from her jacket. No voices are present. Background captures faint insect patterns and one isolated wind gust through dry pine branches. The audio stabilizes quickly, confirming calm, controlled movement. 3 minutes into the overall timeline, the audio shows a subtle drop in environmental frequency response, a common acoustic effect during temperature inversion near shallow ridges. Lower frequency bands flatten, creating a perceptible quiet space. Emily's breathing becomes slightly more audible, indicating she had slowed or paused. No adult voices can be heard calling. A second file begins at 2024, triggered by a short vocal emission from Emily just under the SOS threshold. Community waveform breakdowns show that just over 0.31 seconds after she speaks, a low-frequency response appears faintly at the bottom of the spectrogram. The pattern doesn't match owl or coyote signatures recorded from the area. Instead, it aligns closer to a delayed consonant shadow, a mimic effect where the responding sound mirrors the rhythm of the child's speech, but with shifted pitch and incomplete articulation. At 2030, audio captures a surface change. Pine duff gives way to compacted soil, likely part of an old game trail. Emily's footsteps become clearer, but no distress sounds are recorded. The responding audio signature doesn't appear again in this segment. The smartwatch shows a stable local recording profile with no dropouts. At 2033, a third recording triggers after another motion spike. Two percussive sounds occur in clean succession with 1.7 seconds between them. In comparison tests compiled by users, typical branch drops show irregular timing due to bounce and roll. These two sounds remain evenly timed with minimal decay distortion, suggesting intentional patterning rather than environmental coincidence. The knocks don't coincide with rainfall or wind bursts. No third sound follows. Emily's breathing is steady throughout. At this point, Emily's estimated distance from the main campsite is 35 to 40 yards based on spatial mapping. No light from the lantern reaches the area. Terrain continues sloping gently. No predator sounds or wildlife alarms are present. At 2036, Karen made initial contact with local emergency services. Her tone was calm, the report marked as a precautionary welfare check rather than an active missing child emergency. The call summary noted she believed Emily had stepped just beyond the brush line and that visibility was limited. No urgency codes were activated. Michael can be faintly heard in the background of the smartwatch audio around this timestamp, though too distant to register clearly. Despite intermittent coverage typical of the region, the smartwatch maintains a weak but stable connection. However, GPS embedding for these segments remains blank, suggesting that while cellular signal was partially active, location tracking was impaired by canopy interference and terrain angle. At 2041, a responding ranger, already on routine evening patrol nearby, activates body camera recording and arrives at the campsite. Only a 14-second fragment from this footage appears in the leaked compilation. In the clip, the ranger pans the thermal view toward the tree line. As the device runs a routine NUC calibration, the image flickers. During that reset, a faint secondary heat trace briefly registers near the frame edge before the image normalizes. The clip cuts abruptly. Emily was located seconds after the thermal sweep. She was standing upright at the edge of a shallow game trail, roughly 35 yards downslope from the main campsite. The ranger's initial observation noted she didn't appear disoriented or distressed. She was holding 3 small green pine cones in one hand and a single pale feather in the other, both gripped with steady posture, suggesting deliberate collection rather than panic. Emily made visual contact with the ranger before either parent reached her. According to internal field notes referenced in community summaries, she didn't run toward the ranger or call out. Instead, she remained in place, turning once toward the tree line behind her before shifting her weight slightly uphill. When Karen and Michael reached her, Emily made a brief comment about someone she referred to as the tall camper, asking if they were allowed to come back to the campsite as well. That phrasing appeared once in unofficial paraphrased notes shared online by users who claimed to have seen a blurred portion of the ranger's follow-up form. Official documents released publicly didn't include any mention of a second figure, and no additional individuals were registered in surrounding camps based on permit records. During scene documentation, Emily initially held all 3 pine cones. Before personnel could photograph them in her hand, she placed them down in a straight line on the ground. Personnel noted the placement appeared intentional rather than dropped. The line of pine cones sat parallel to a faint indentation in the moss. In those images, a subtle secondary impression appears to the right of the cones, consistent with a larger, flatter weight distribution. The 3 pine cones were bagged and tagged with rough GPS coordinates before being logged as non-critical physical items. No conclusion was attached to the secondary indentation. Emily showed no signs of environmental exposure beyond light dirt on her shoes and sleeves. Her smartwatch remained active, still running its safety monitoring process. The device had logged a final vibration alert at 20:43, indicating proximity reacquisition to the paired phone when Karen came within 30 feet. The ranger's on-scene assessment didn't classify the event as a separation emergency. It was recorded as a resolved welfare check with no injuries or missing time. Emily's breathing and heart rate, based on smartwatch biometrics, remained within normal ranges. No elevated stress markers were detected in available log segments. Later that evening, Karen and Michael dismantled part of their setup, repositioning their tent closer to the center of the clearing. No additional calls were made to emergency services. Campsite records show they remained through the night and checked out at normal time the following morning. The feather, later identified as belonging to a regional bird species, drew less focus. However, viewers pointed out it appeared clean and free of debris, unlike others found on forest floors, raising speculation it had been hand-picked or recently dislodged rather than collected from the ground. Emily didn't provide any formal statement. No transcript exists. The only public reference to her description remains that single, paraphrased line from the leaked ranger form, later removed from circulation following takedown requests. After Emily was recovered, a brief sweep of the immediate area was conducted. The ground consisted of compact soil layered with thin pine needles and intermittent moss patches. That surface allowed shallow impression retention, but wasn't soft enough for deep, well-defined tracks. 2 distinct compression patterns were noted. The first matched expected dimensions of a child's footstep, showing narrow pressure points consistent with lightweight footwear and heel-to-toe distribution. These impressions lined up with Emily's known path and were spaced in typical walking rhythm. The second pattern appeared adjacent to hers at irregular intervals. It didn't display the same stride profile or directional roll typical of human walking. Instead of defined heel impact and forward pressure, the second pattern showed broader surface contact, as if weight had been distributed across a wider base rather than through sequential foot mechanics. The shape lacked clear outlines, only shallow oval depressions with minimal edge definition, suggesting heavier mass pressing downward in flat contact. These impressions paralleled Emily's track line for approximately 10 to 12 feet, before fading into compressed undergrowth where no distinct impressions were retained. Amateur analysts later overlaid measurement grids and concluded that spacing of the secondary compressions suggested stride distance slightly longer than an adult human's average step length, though still within plausible range for someone moving slowly on uneven terrain. Beyond the last recorded impression, a small fragment of hair fiber was found snagged on rough bark of a low branch. It was collected and sealed under routine procedure. Internal labeling captured briefly in a leaked evidence sheet listed the entry as hair sample, non-human, pending classification. According to later forum discussions, the sample was sent to a state wildlife database, but returned no species match. The entry was subsequently marked inconclusive and archived without further testing. The sample number wasn't referenced again in mirrored reports available online. A volunteer analyst later slowed down the ranger's body cam footage. In one frame, a thin, light-colored thread-like shape can be seen near the branch where the sample was taken. Image resolution is too low to confirm whether it matches the collected sample. Enhancement attempts only increase digital noise and artifacts. The moss compression map generated by online contributors marked 2 parallel movement lines, one labeled as child path, the other as unknown. The unknown line showed less defined stride sequencing, with pressure appearing sporadically rather than distributed through consistent step cycles. Supporters of the mimicry interpretation pointed to this as evidence of non-human locomotion. Others argued that anyone moving cautiously without raising heels fully could leave similar marks. especially if barefoot or wearing soft, wide-soled boots. No claw, paw, or clear footwear outline was found. The impressions remained ambiguous, reduced to weight presence without identifiable footprint shape. Forest Service personnel didn't classify the impressions as track evidence. Official assessment referred to them only as localized surface compression consistent with recent human or wildlife movement. No plaster casts were made. Scene preservation was not initiated. By the following afternoon, most surface disturbance had been obscured by wind, foot traffic, and natural debris shift. Once the audio clip began circulating beyond camping forums, hobby analysts extracted the waveform and flagged a specific point. At 22.4 seconds into the 54-second clip, later referred to as timestamp 0:22.4, Emily's voice produces a clear frequency spike. Just over 0.31 seconds later, a second spike appears on the waveform. Overlays show her initial vocal ridge as narrow and high frequency, followed by a lower, broader response signal that doesn't match her pitch or breath pattern. When metadata was extracted, a raw tag appeared in the hex log. Profile, unmatched, cadence, flagged. Community parsers noted that the device labeled the response event as User 2, a designation enthusiasts believe is applied when cadence doesn't match the registered profile. This labeling behavior isn't confirmed by the manufacturer and may not apply to wildlife or ambient noise. Spectrogram renderings show the response peak has an independent decay curve, rather than the softened trail expected from wind bounce or echo reverb. The event reads as a separate sound source, not a continuation of the child's voice. This moment became the core of what discussion threads called the cadence imitation debate. One side argued the second waveform peak was an environmental artifact, a micro-echo created by wind pressure across the smartwatch microphone, producing a delayed pulse that only appeared to mirror speech timing. Others countered that the delay fell inside the response window normally associated with human conversational pacing, noticeably tighter than the gap seen in barred owl mimic sequences or wildlife call overlaps. Breath noise in the low band during the return signal shows flattened airflow modulation, not matching standard human inhale-exhale rhythm. However, compression artifacts make that inconclusive. No official agency released a spectrogram. All available breakdowns are community-generated, pulled from mirrors of varying quality. Despite multiple recompressions, timing alignment at 0022.4 remained consistent across every known copy. Once the clip spread beyond small audio forums, discussion divided into distinct camps. Some classified it as a staged viral attempt, suggesting Michael had intentionally trimmed the recording to generate mystery around a harmless moment in the woods. They referenced the missing 18 seconds as deliberate editing to create artificial tension. Another group treated it as wildlife mimicry, comparing the return sound to known raven echo patterns recorded in mixed conifer regions. They argued the flattened secondary peak could be explained by ambient call rebound distorted through low-quality compression. A third cluster, referred to as the cadence tracking crowd, pointed to primate mimicry studies documenting delayed rhythmic imitation behaviors. They used the 0.31 second gap as a marker, arguing timing alone separated the clip from the typical bird or owl response patterns. During this debate, a blurred image surfaced allegedly from a ranger's internal field form. In that image, one line read, "Auditory anomaly, non-parental source noted," before the rest was obscured by black redaction blocks. No verified source confirmed authenticity, but it circulated heavily before takedown requests removed most copies. Karen and Michael didn't respond to public inquiries after leaving the campsite. Michael's social media accounts were closed within 2 days of the leak circulating. The Forest Service issued a brief notice stating all audio involving minors fell under privacy protection classification and wouldn't be released in full. Takedown claims began targeting mirrored uploads across multiple platforms, citing unauthorized distribution of a minor's recorded voice. In response, online users shifted to mapping the pinecone evidence coordinates, tracing a narrow offshoot trail running deeper into the brush, away from established campground paths. In weeks following takedowns, a few small YouTube channels focused on trail documentation visited the campsite location. Their videos showed shallow duff impressions and moss patches, similar to those in leaked evidence photos. One hiker using a budget thermal monocular reported a brief cold gap in the same sector where the ranger's body cam experienced its calibration blackout. The footage didn't claim any encounter or discovery. Some users referred to this as a residual thermal mask, a known effect where a recently present warm mass leaves a temporary cold contrast void when viewed after a delay, though the device quality limits confidence. Analysts reviewing timing confirmed the response pattern matched Emily's syllable spacing twice, both within a 300 millisecond reaction window. No language was formed, only timing alignment. With no further recording and the missing 18 seconds unrecovered, the discussion narrowed to a single unresolved point. If it wasn't human, then what matched her rhythm so precisely?
Behind a tree. I can see it, barely.
For 30 years, loggers have vanished in the Shadowmere Mountains. Over 1,000 men gone without a trace. In October 2019, Safety Inspector Tim Bennett discovered why and witnessed Bigfoot's methodical demonstration of how each victim died. What Bennett saw in those cursed woods would haunt him forever, but no one would ever believe his testimony. The forest was wrong. Bennett felt it the moment he stepped into the investigation zone, a suffocating silence that pressed against his eardrums like cotton. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. Even the wind seemed afraid to disturb the branches overhead. 3 days into his investigation, Bennett found the first bones. They lay scattered in a clearing like broken toys, bleached white by years of mountain weather. But these weren't the remains of natural death. Every bone had been systematically shattered, crushed with deliberate precision that spoke of intelligence and malice. A human skull sat propped against a rotting log, cracked open like an egg. The fracture lines were too perfect, too methodical. Whatever had done this knew exactly where to apply pressure to split bone without destroying the contents inside. Brain matter had been scooped out while the victim was still breathing. Bennett's hands trembled as he documented the scene. Femurs snapped in half with the marrow extracted. Rib cages torn apart and scattered like pickup sticks. Finger bones arranged in neat little rows, as if someone had been counting them. The smell hit him then. Not just decay, but something else. Something alive and foul that made his stomach lurch. The stench of a predator's den, thick with the accumulated odor of countless kills. Mixed among the human remains were fragments of logging equipment, hard hats crushed flat as pancakes, safety vests shredded into ribbons, chainsaw parts scattered like confetti, their metal surfaces bearing deep gouges from claws that could slice through steel. Bennett counted bone fragments from at least 40 different people in this single clearing, 40 families who would never know what happened to their loved ones, 40 men who had died screaming in this cursed place. The bones told stories of prolonged agony. Stress fractures indicated victims had been kept alive during torture. Teeth marks on femurs showed something had gnawed on living bone. Skull fragments bore precise holes where brain matter had been extracted with surgical precision while hearts still beat. Moving deeper into the forest, Bennett discovered the trees. Ancient pines bore scars that made his blood freeze. Claw marks gouged 15 feet up their trunks, parallel grooves carved so deep they wept sap like tears. The marks weren't random. They formed patterns, symbols, messages written in a language of violence that only the creature understood. Some trees had been snapped in half like matchsticks, their massive trunks twisted and broken with impossible strength. The destruction was methodical, purposeful. This wasn't territorial marking. This was a gallery of violence, a museum of suffering displayed for anyone brave or foolish enough to venture this deep into the creature's domain. The deeper Bennett went, the more extensive the markings became. Trees bore multiple sets of gouges at different heights, chronicling years of growth and countless successful hunts. Some marks were fresh, the wood still bleeding sap. Others were old and weathered, speaking of decades of systematic terror. The claw marks formed ritualistic patterns that seemed to tell stories. Some trees bore spiraling gouges that wrapped around their trunks like twisted prayers. Others showed parallel lines that counted something, kills perhaps, or years of hunting. The creature was keeping score, documenting its work with the pride of an artist. Bennett found evidence of the creature's intelligence in the way it had arranged certain trees. Massive logs had been positioned to create barriers and channels, funneling prey into specific areas where escape would be impossible. This wasn't random destruction. It was environmental engineering designed to maximize the efficiency of the hunt. Then he heard it. Wet tearing noises accompanied the vocalizations, the crack of breaking bones. And underneath it all, something that made Bennett's skin crawl, the unmistakable sound of pleasure. Whatever was making these noises was enjoying itself. The sounds followed a pattern that spoke of intelligence. Periods of intense activity punctuated by moments of silence, as if the creature was pausing to savor its work. Each vocalization carried a quality of satisfaction that was more terrifying than any roar of rage. Bennett's training told him to retreat, to call for backup, to get as far away from this place as possible. But something compelled him forward, a need to understand, to document, to bear witness to whatever horror was unfolding in the darkness ahead. The forest grew denser as he approached the source of the sounds. Ancient trees created a canopy so thick that noon felt like twilight. The air grew heavy and oppressive, thick with the smell of decay and something else, a musky animal odor that seemed to coat the inside of his nostrils. The sounds grew louder as Bennett crept forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. Each step brought him closer to something his mind couldn't fully process. The source of 30 years of terror, the answer to 1,000 disappearances. Through gaps in the undergrowth, Bennett caught glimpses of movement, something massive shifting in the clearing ahead, too large to be any known animal. The movements were deliberate, methodical, accompanied by those wet tearing sounds that made his stomach churn. Bennett pressed himself against a massive pine tree, its bark rough against his cheek as he peered around the trunk. What he saw in that clearing would haunt him for the rest of his life. It stood 12 feet tall in a small clearing, its massive frame covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb light. Its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, hands that could crush a man's skull like a grape. This was evolution's nightmare, intelligence wedded to unstoppable physical power. The creature's face was the most disturbing aspect. While its body was covered in coarse fur, its features showed expressions that were unmistakably intelligent and malevolent. Its eyes held a spark of awareness that was more terrifying than any mindless animal rage. This thing understood exactly what it was doing. But it was what the creature was doing that revealed the true horror. In its massive hands, it held a deer, not feeding on it, not killing it quickly as any natural predator would. Instead, it was torturing the animal with methodical precision, demonstrating techniques that Bennett recognized from the scattered human remains throughout the forest. The deer was still alive, still conscious, its eyes wide with terror and pain. The creature had been working on it for some time. Several of its legs were already broken, bent at impossible angles, while the animal remained aware of every moment of its suffering. Bennett watched in frozen horror as the creature's face showed unmistakable pleasure at the deer's agony. Its eyes held an intelligence that was more terrifying than any mindless animal rage. This thing understood exactly what it was doing and took satisfaction in every scream, every broken bone, every moment of terror. The creature paused in its work, tilting its massive head as if listening to something. Bennett's blood turned to ice as he realized the creature was savoring the deer's labored breathing, the small whimpers of pain that escaped its throat. This wasn't just torture. It was a symphony of suffering that the creature conducted with artistic precision. Slowly, Deliberately, the creature grasped the deer's remaining unbroken leg. It looked directly at the animal's face, seeming to feed on the terror in its eyes before applying pressure. The bone snapped with a wet crack that echoed through the clearing, and the deer's scream was almost human in its agony. The creature's face showed pure ecstasy at the sound. This wasn't hunger or territorial behavior. This was addiction, a compulsion to cause suffering that had been refined through decades of practice on both animal and human victims. Bennett realized he was witnessing the exact methods used on every missing logger. The creature had been perfecting these techniques for years, practicing on animal victims before applying them to human prey. Every vanished worker had experienced this same systematic horror. The creature began working on the deer's torso, its massive hands exploring the animal's ribcage like a pianist testing keys. It applied pressure gradually, methodically, listening to the subtle changes in the deer's breathing as ribs began to crack under the strain. Each breaking rib was a note in the creature's twisted composition. It would pause after each break, tilting its head to listen to the deer's increasingly desperate gasps for air. The creature was timing the breaks, spacing them out to prolong the animal's consciousness and maximize its suffering. Bennett's hands shook as he watched the systematic torture unfold. This was how the loggers had died. All of them. 1,000 men subjected to the same methodical agony, their screams echoing through these cursed woods as the creature perfected its techniques on human prey. The creature's methods were sophisticated, refined through decades of practice. It knew precisely how much damage it could inflict without causing death, how to keep its victims conscious despite extreme trauma, how to prolong suffering for maximum effect. The creature moved to the deer's skull, but instead of crushing it immediately, it used its claws to make precise cuts in the scalp. Peeling back sections of skin to expose bone beneath, the technique was sophisticated and deliberate, designed to cause maximum pain while keeping the victim conscious for as long as possible. Those claws were perfectly adapted for this work, sharp enough to slice through skin and muscle with surgical precision, controlled enough to avoid vital structures that would end the demonstration too quickly. The creature had performed this procedure countless times, and its movements showed the confidence of extensive practice. The creature paused between acts of violence, allowing the deer to fully comprehend its situation. This wasn't just physical torture, it was psychological warfare designed to maximize terror and despair. The creature understood that fear was as important as pain in creating the perfect victim. The deer's eyes showed the same terror Bennett had seen in nightmares, the look of something that understood it was going to die slowly and painfully, that its suffering was deliberate and inescapable. The creature fed on this terror as much as it would later feed on flesh. Finally, the creature began applying pressure to the deer's skull, slowly, methodically, increasing force until hairline cracks appeared in the bone. The animal's cries grew weaker, but the creature maintained just enough restraint to keep it conscious until the very end. The skull collapsed with a wet cracking sound that seemed to echo forever in the oppressive silence of the forest. The deer's suffering ended, but the creature wasn't finished. It held up the crushed skull, examining its work with obvious satisfaction before tossing it aside to join countless other remains. As Bennett watched in horror, the creature slowly turned its massive head toward his hiding place. Those ancient, malevolent eyes locked onto his position with unmistakable intelligence. The creature had known he was there all along. A low rumble emanated from the creature's throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something that spoke of satisfaction and anticipation. It had been performing for an audience, demonstrating its methods for Bennett's benefit. Bennett's paralysis broke as the creature began to rise to its full height. 12 feet of muscle and malevolence unfolding like a nightmare made flesh. He turned to run, but his legs felt like lead, his muscles refusing to obey as terror flooded his system. Behind him, the creature made a sound that would haunt Bennett's dreams, a deep, rumbling vocalization that seemed to express amusement. The creature was enjoying this moment, savoring the fear it was causing before the real work began. Bennett crashed through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his clothes and skin. But he could hear the creature following, not running, not hurrying, but moving with the patient confidence of something that knew it could catch its prey whenever it chose. The sounds of pursuit were deliberate and measured. Heavy footsteps that crushed undergrowth and snapped branches like gunshots. The creature wasn't trying to be stealthy. It wanted Bennett to hear it coming, wanted him to understand that escape was impossible. Bennett's lungs burned as he ran, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. But the creature's presence pressed down on him like a physical weight, a malevolent force that seemed to sap his strength with every step. The forest itself seemed to be working against him. Roots caught his feet, branches blocked his path, and the very air grew thick and oppressive. This place was cursed, tainted by decades of systematic murder and torture. Behind him, the creature's breathing was audible, deep, rhythmic, almost meditative. It was savoring this moment, taking pleasure in the anticipation of what was to come. Bennett realized this chase was just another form of torture designed to maximize fear before the physical agony began. Bennett stumbled over a fallen log and went down hard, his hands scraping against rough bark as he tried to break his fall. The creature's footsteps grew closer, and Bennett could smell its musk, a wild, predatory scent that spoke of violence and death. He rolled behind the log just as the creature appeared in the gap between the trees. Bennett pressed himself against the rotting wood, trying to make himself invisible as the massive form passed by. The creature paused, its head turning slowly as it scanned the area. For a terrifying moment, Bennett thought he had been discovered. The creature's nostrils flared as it tested the air, and its eyes seemed to look directly at his hiding spot. But then it moved on, its heavy footsteps receding into the distance. Bennett waited until the sounds faded completely before emerging from his hiding place. His clothes were torn and bloody from thorns and branches, and his hands shook uncontrollably as he tried to orient himself in the dense forest. The sounds of pursuit had stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the creature's approach had been. Bennett crouched behind a fallen log, his breathing shallow and rapid as he strained to hear any sign of movement. Nothing. The forest had returned to its unnatural quiet, as if even the trees were holding their breath. Bennett's skin crawled with the sensation of being watched, of predatory eyes studying his every move from the shadows. Minutes passed like hours. Bennett remained frozen behind the log, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly. The silence stretched on, broken only by the sound of his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Then he heard it, a soft rustling in the undergrowth behind him. Not the heavy footsteps of before, but something more subtle, more patient. The creature was stalking him now, moving with the careful precision of something that had all the time in the world. A twig snapped to his left. Bennett spun toward the sound, but saw nothing except darkness between the trees. His heart hammered against his ribs as he realized the creature was toying with him, playing a game of cat and mouse before moving in for the kill. Another sound, this time from his right. The soft whisper of something large moving through the undergrowth with predatory grace. Bennett's head whipped back and forth, trying to track the creature's position, but it seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. The creature was circling him, Bennett realized, moving through the forest with supernatural stealth, studying its prey before deciding how to proceed. This was part of the torture, the psychological terror that preceded the physical agony. Bennett tried to move quietly through the undergrowth, but every step seemed to make noise that echoed through the forest like gunshots. Twigs snapped under his feet, branches rustled as he pushed past them, and his labored breathing seemed loud enough to wake the dead. The creature was hurting him, Bennett realized with growing horror. Every time he tried to move in one direction, he would hear sounds that drove him back. The creature was using the forest itself as a trap, channeling him towards some predetermined destination. Then Bennett saw them, two glowing eyes watching him from the darkness between the trees. Ancient, malevolent, filled with an intelligence that was more terrifying than any animal instinct. The creature had been there all along, observing, waiting, savoring the fear it was causing. The eyes moved closer, and Bennett could make out the massive shape behind them. The creature was approaching slowly, deliberately, taking its time to build terror before the real work began. Bennett tried to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. Terror had frozen him in place, leaving him helpless as the creature emerged from the shadows like a nightmare made flesh. 12 feet of muscle and malevolence, covered in dark fur that seemed to absorb light. Its proportions were wrong in ways that hurt to look at. Arms too long, hands too large, a face that combined human intelligence with animal savagery. The creature stopped just outside arm's reach, studying Bennett with those ancient eyes. Its expression was one of satisfaction, like an artist contemplating a blank canvas. It had been looking forward to this moment, planning exactly how it would demonstrate its methods on this new victim. Bennett found his voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. The creature tilted its massive head, as if considering his plea. Then it reached out with one enormous hand, its claws extended toward Bennett's face. Bennett's paralysis finally broke. He rolled to the side just as those claws swept through the air where his head had been. The creature's reflexes were lightning fast, but Bennett's desperate terror gave him a burst of adrenaline that sent him scrambling through the undergrowth. The creature roared, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest. It was no longer playing games. The hunt had begun in earnest. Bennett crashed through the forest with desperate energy, branches whipping at his face and roots trying to trip him with every step. Behind him, the creature's pursuit was relentless. Heavy footsteps that seemed to shake the ground, the sound of trees being pushed aside like saplings. But Bennett had one advantage. He was smaller, more agile, able to squeeze through gaps in the undergrowth that the massive creature had to force its way through. He used every trick he could think of, doubling back on his trail, splashing through streams to mask his scent, climbing over fallen logs that might slow his pursuer. The chase continued for what felt like hours. Bennett's lungs burned, his legs ached, and his clothes were torn to shreds by thorns and branches. But still he ran, driven by the knowledge of what awaited him if the creature caught up. Bennett found himself in a maze of fallen trees, their massive trunks creating a natural obstacle course that he navigated with desperate agility. Behind him, he could hear the creature forcing its way through the barriers, snapping branches and crushing undergrowth with its immense strength. He squeezed through a gap between two fallen logs, his torn shirt catching on the rough bark. The creature's roar of frustration echoed behind him as it struggled to follow through the narrow opening. Bennett had gained precious seconds, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. Ahead, he spotted a steep ravine cutting through the forest floor. Without hesitation, Bennett leaped across the gap, landing hard on the far side and rolling to absorb the impact. The creature appeared at the edge of the ravine moments later, its eyes blazing with fury at being momentarily thwarted. But the creature was far from defeated. With a powerful leap that defied its massive size, it cleared the ravine effortlessly, landing with a thunderous impact that shook the ground beneath Bennett's feet. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. Bennett allowed himself to hope that he had lost the creature, that somehow he had managed to escape the nightmare that had claimed so many others. He stumbled into another clearing, his legs finally giving out from exhaustion. As he struggled to catch his breath, he found himself surrounded by more evidence of the creature's work. Personal belongings scattered like leaves in the wind. A wallet, leather cracked and stained, but still intact. Inside, a driver's license, dirty and weathered, but readable. The name, Marcus Holloway. Address, Grimhaven. Bennett recognized it immediately. Holloway had vanished just 3 weeks ago with his entire crew. Near the wallet lay pieces of clothing matching exactly what Holloway's wife had described to search teams. A red and black flannel shirt, now shredded and blood-soaked. Steel-toed work boots with deep claw gouges. Heavy denim jeans torn apart with such violence they looked like they'd been fed through a wood chipper. The clothing told a story of prolonged struggle. The shirt was torn in patterns that suggested the victim had been held down while the creature worked. Bloodstains showed where major arteries had been opened, but not immediately. The creature had kept its victim alive for as long as possible. But the most chilling discovery was Holloway's work ID badge, still clipped to what remained of his shirt. The plastic was cracked and filthy, but the photo was visible, a smiling man in his 30s with kind eyes and a full beard. The badge identified him as a Thornwick Timber Company employee. Bennett stared at that photo, realizing he was looking at someone who had experienced the same systematic torture he just witnessed being inflicted on the deer. Holloway had been kept conscious as his bones were broken one by one, had felt every moment of agony as the creature demonstrated its refined methods of causing pain. This wasn't an abstract case anymore. This was a man with a family, a life, dreams, all ended by a creature that viewed human suffering as entertainment. Holloway's wife was still waiting for news, not knowing her husband's remains were scattered in this cursed clearing. Searching frantically, Bennett found more evidence. Another wallet containing James Morrison's ID, a logger who disappeared 2 months earlier. His safety vest and hard hat lay nearby, destroyed with the same savage violence. The hard hat was crushed flat, bearing claw marks that had punched through the reinforced plastic like paper. Morrison's belongings told the same story of prolonged torture. His work gloves were shredded, suggesting he'd tried to defend himself. His belt buckle was bent and twisted, indicating the creature had taken time to remove clothing piece by piece, prolonging the victim's terror and humiliation. The pattern was clear now. The creature had been systematically hunting logging crews, taking them one by one for its twisted experiments. Each personal belonging represented an individual tragedy, a person subjected to unimaginable suffering for the creature's pleasure. Bennett found more IDs, more personal effects. David Chen, missing 4 months. Robert Williams, gone 6 months. Thomas Anderson, vanished 8 months ago. Each man's belongings told the same story of systematic torture and prolonged death. Among the scattered belongings, Bennett discovered something that made his blood run cold. A small notebook, its pages water-stained and partially illegible, but still readable enough to reveal its contents. It was Morrison's work journal, documenting his final days before the disappearance. The handwriting in the final entry was shaky and desperate, describing how the crew had found evidence that something had been watching them for days, learning their routines and weaknesses. Morrison had written about his growing certainty that whatever was stalking them was planning something terrible. Bennett also found a digital camera among the belongings, its memory card still intact despite the weather damage. When he checked the display, his blood ran cold. The final photos showed massive footprints around the logging camp, claw marks on trees, and in the last image, a blurry but unmistakable shape watching the camp from the tree line. Bennett stuffed the IDs, journal, and camera into his jacket pocket, his hands shaking uncontrollably. If he somehow escaped, these would provide proof of what happened to the missing men. The families deserved to know, even if the truth was too horrible to fully comprehend. A branch snapped behind him. Bennett spun around to see the creature standing at the edge of the clearing, its massive form silhouetted against the dying light. It had found him again, had been watching him discover the evidence of its work. But something was different now. The creature wasn't approaching. It stood perfectly still, studying Bennett with those ancient eyes, as if making some kind of decision. The creature's gaze moved from Bennett to the scattered belongings around him, then back to Bennett's face. There was something almost curious in its expression, as if it was interested in Bennett's reaction to discovering the evidence of its victims. Bennett backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving the creature. One step, then another, moving toward the far edge of the clearing. The creature watched, but didn't follow. For long moments they stared at each other across the clearing, predator and prey locked in a silent standoff. Bennett could see intelligence in those ancient eyes, a calculating awareness that was more terrifying than any mindless animal rage. The creature seemed to be studying Bennett's face, reading his expressions, analyzing his fear and horror at discovering the evidence of its work. There was something almost scientific in its observation, as if Bennett was a specimen being examined for future reference. The standoff stretched on, neither moving, neither breaking eye contact. Bennett could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool mountain air. His muscles were tensed for flight, but something in the creature's posture suggested that running would trigger an immediate and violent response. Then, without warning, the creature turned and melted back into the forest. One moment it was there, a towering presence of malevolence and death. The next, it was gone, as if it had never existed at all. Bennett stood alone in the clearing, surrounded by the scattered belongings of dead men, wondering if he had just experienced a miracle or if the creature was simply playing another game. He didn't wait to find out. Bennett ran through the forest with renewed desperation, following what he hoped was the path back to his investigation camp. The sun was setting, and he knew that darkness would only make his situation worse. The forest seemed to shift and change around him as he ran, familiar landmarks disappearing and new obstacles appearing in his path. Bennett began to suspect that the creature was still manipulating his route, herding him toward some unknown destination. Hours later, exhausted and bleeding from dozens of cuts and scratches, Bennett finally reached his camp. His equipment was still there, undisturbed, as if the creature had no interest in his investigation tools. But as Bennett gathered his gear with shaking hands, he noticed something that made his blood freeze. His tent had been opened, and inside, arranged neatly on his sleeping bag, were items that hadn't been there before. A logger's hard hat, crushed and bearing fresh claw marks. A work glove, torn and stained with blood that was still wet. And most disturbing of all, a Polaroid photograph showing Bennett himself, taken from the shadows, while he had been documenting the bone field earlier that day. The message was clear. The creature had been watching him from the beginning, studying him, learning about him. It could have taken him at any time, but it had chosen not to. The question was, why? Bennett also found his investigation notes had been disturbed. Pages were missing, and others had been arranged in a specific pattern that seemed to tell a story. The creature had been reading his work, understanding his methods, perhaps even learning from his documentation techniques. Bennett fled the mountains, driving through the night until he reached the safety of civilization. But even then, surrounded by electric lights and human voices, he couldn't shake the feeling that ancient eyes were still watching him from the darkness. His hands shook so violently that he could barely grip the steering wheel. Every shadow seemed to hide a massive form. Every sound made him jump. The creature's presence had left a mark on him that went deeper than physical wounds. It had touched something primal in his mind, awakening fears that civilization had tried to bury.
Wait up!
On June 15, 2015, a mother from Oklahoma called 911, her house torn apart. Doors splintered, massive handprints gouged into the siding, and her daughter attacked. What followed would be one of the most disputed Bigfoot-related disappearances ever on reservation land. Anita Graywolf, 39, was a social worker from Tulsa who had spent most of her life listening to other people's stories and learning how to separate fear from fact. After years in the city, she decided to return with her daughter, Maya, to the family property on the southeastern border of the Cherokee Reservation, a place her grandparents had once warned her never to disturb. For Anita, the move felt like both an escape and a responsibility, to remind her daughter where she came from, unaware that the valley they were returning to had been waiting for them. The land sat beside Hollow Valley, a stretch of forest that Anita remembered only through half-forgotten warnings from her grandparents. The stories she said she knew had always been about the Stone Man, a guardian spirit said to rise when people disturbed the balance of the old ground. Anita had once laughed at those tales. Now, standing in the quiet clearing, she found herself uneasy at how easily the valley swallowed sound. She said that when she announced her plans to stay for the summer, the tribal elders' concern unsettled her more than she admitted. They told her the Stone Man walks when people forget him, and that Hollow Valley remembers what was taken from it. She wanted to believe their tone was ceremonial, but there was something in their eyes that lingered after the conversation ended. She later learned their worry had roots in the past. In the 1950s, a limestone quarry had been cut directly into ground, once used for Cherokee burials and ceremonies. The elders said the land had never settled after that. But was it merely a story meant to preserve respect, or a warning too old to be ignored? Her skepticism would have felt firmer if she had known nothing of the missing person cases that surrounded the valley. For decades, rumors had circulated about disappearances quietly erased from tribal police files. The idea sounded impossible, but something about that absence, what wasn't on paper, bothered her. Why were those records erased, and by whom? By the time she and Maya arrived in early June 2015, Anita said that she was determined to treat the trip as a family experiment rather than a spiritual one. She had no reason to think the valley would challenge her sense of what was real. Maya, eager for a project, began recording interviews with elders for what she called a folklore study. Anita mentioned to investigators that she encouraged it, proud of her daughter's initiative. The drawings Maya made afterward, tall figures covered in moss with eyes like polished stone, struck Anita as creative exaggerations. So why did Maya's drawings start to match what others had described decades earlier? When Maya reviewed her recordings, she mentioned a faint pulsing sound that repeated through every clip filmed near the tree line. Anita assumed it was interference, maybe a faulty microphone. Later analysis by others would suggest the frequencies resembled those produced by large mammals, but at the time, Anita dismissed it without hesitation. The first thing she couldn't dismiss came from the dogs. They refused to cross the clearing that bordered the forest, bracing their legs and whining whenever she tried to lead them forward. Even food couldn't persuade them. Their bodies went rigid, muscles trembling, eyes fixed on the dark edge of the trees, as though something waited just beyond sight. Anita compared this animal reaction to what she had seen in trauma survivors: instinctive, unreasoned, absolute. She wrote it off at first as a remnant of travel stress, but over the next 2 days the dogs grew worse, pacing the porch at night and refusing to leave the steps, even to relieve themselves. On June 8th, she and Maya began hearing slow, deliberate impacts from the direction of the valley. 3 strikes, always in sequence, then silence. The sound was heavy, like wood on wet earth, each blow separated by an unnatural stillness. Anita kept count in a small notebook, treating each sound like a case note, noting the intervals and time of day. Sometimes the noises came after dusk, other times at dawn when the air was completely still. She wondered if stress or isolation had made her hypersensitive to noise, but the dogs would react first, heads lifting moments before she heard it. 4 days later, Maya filmed a short interview with her on the porch, a casual talk about family heritage and why they'd returned. The atmosphere felt peaceful, though Anita noticed the quiet had changed in a subtle way. The absence of birds, the stillness of leaves. She remembered the light that afternoon, bright, steady, the woods behind her unmoving in the heat. Maya had laughed easily, asking about old stories their grandmother used to tell. Everything about that hour seemed ordinary until later that night, when Maya replayed the footage. When she did, she froze. At the 18-minute mark, behind where Anita had been sitting, a tall figure stood between the trees. It did not move. The shape was dark, featureless, but clearly solid, the upper outline distinct against the lighter canopy. Anita thought it might have been a shadow at first, some play of light through shifting branches, but the figure remained fixed while the camera trembled slightly in Maya's hands. Frame-by-frame review showed it remained visible for nearly 4 minutes before vanishing between one frame and the next. By tree measurements, it stood more than 8 feet tall. Its limbs appeared long, almost disproportionate, the posture too upright for a bear and too broad for a man. Anita watched the footage twice, then a third time, unable to decide whether she was seeing a trick of light or the shape the elders had warned about. The one said to appear first at a distance, always watching, never retreating. She turned off the laptop and told Maya to delete the file, but by then it had already been copied to her phone. The question that lingered after the screen went dark wasn't what it was. Investigators later asked, how does something that large vanish in a single frame? According to reports, word of Maya's footage spread quickly through the tribal community, reaching Anita before she was ready to face the attention it brought. 2 Cherokee police officers arrived the next afternoon, requesting copies of the recording. Anita watched them move methodically through the property, examining the area where the figure had stood. They pointed to the impressions in the soft earth near the tree line, indentations she had stepped around for days without realizing their significance. Plaster casts were made of several 16-inch footprints that revealed a strange, asymmetrical gait. Anita noticed how the impressions sank deeply at both heel and toe, suggesting something heavy yet balanced, as though whatever made them could move with its full weight upright. The stride between each print measured nearly 4 feet. To her, it looked like a pattern that belonged to neither man nor bear, but something that walked like both. Despite the documentation, the casts were gone within days. Anita learned that wildlife management had taken possession of them, though she did say that she never saw any paperwork confirming that transfer. When she later asked for the case number, the files had already disappeared from the record. What remained were Maya's photographs, the only proof that the prints had existed at all. That night, the rhythmic knocking resumed. Anita marked 3 distinct impacts in her notebook, followed by a deep, dragging exhalation that seemed to press through the bedroom wall. It was the first time she admitted to herself that she was frightened, though she forced her mind to frame it as data. Something to be cataloged, not feared. The disturbances were escalating. Anita felt a growing certainty that their arrival had disrupted something old and watchful, something that had waited for acknowledgement. The Stone Man legend was no longer folklore whispered by elders. It was pressing against her reality. By the second week of June, the property had taken on the atmosphere of a siege. The nighttime sounds followed a strict schedule, every night between 2:45 and 3:10. Anita said that she would wake to 3 heavy knocks from different sides of the house, then silence, then guttural calls that vibrated through the walls with physical force. She documented each sequence, her digital recorder filling with data she could neither explain nor dismiss. When wildlife officers arrived to analyze the recordings, their report only deepened her confusion. The sounds matched no known species in the region and registered at decibel levels, suggesting immense lung capacity. One officer remarked that the calls appeared to be directed toward the Gray Wolf residence, as if in response to something within it. Anita replayed that observation in her head for nights afterward, wondering if something in the valley recognized them specifically. But if it wanted contact, why did it never approach openly? Alongside the sounds came an odor so pungent it seemed alive, a mixture of wet earth and decomposition that saturated the air and vanished at sunrise. Anita noted its presence during every nocturnal disturbance. Maya, increasingly distressed, began sleeping with towels under her door to block the smell, complaining that it caused nausea and headaches. On June 12th, Anita told investigators that she found the chicken coop destroyed at dawn. The wooden frame had collapsed inward, boards splintered but unmarked by claw or bite. There were no tracks in the surrounding dirt, no drag signs, no sign of struggle. The chain-link fencing had been crushed from above as if something immense had dropped onto it. The force required to break the wooden posts at ground level seemed beyond any natural animal. Yet the scene bore no mechanical evidence, no tire marks, no tool impressions. The 6 chickens lay arranged in a straight line 20 feet from the coop. Each neck was broken cleanly, the bodies otherwise untouched. Anita stood over them for several minutes, struck by the absence of chaos. Whatever had done this, it had acted with purpose. 3 days later, during a survey of the property line, she noticed several mature oaks near the abandoned quarry, stripped of bark in clean vertical lines reaching 8 feet up the trunks. The sap was still fresh. When forestry officials inspected the damage, they found no evidence of tools. The bark had been removed in single, fluid motions that implied immense leverage or precision. Reports from nearby ranchers followed the next morning. Deer carcasses had begun appearing in semicircular patterns across the valley, all facing the forest. Anita noted how consistent the arrangement sounded, deliberate, almost ceremonial. The animals showed no sign of disease or predation, their bodies unmarked and intact. Veterinary exams revealed no physiological cause of death. The symmetry of it unsettled her more than the images themselves. Who or what had arranged them with such deliberate symmetry? Technological interference intensified as the pattern continued. Trail cameras deployed by wildlife officers failed within a day. Their storage cards corrupted or blank. One managed to capture 6 seconds of usable footage before malfunctioning. When Anita reviewed the clip at the tribal office, she saw a massive silhouette pass close to the lens, so near that the frame blurred from motion. The shape filled the entire shot, yet no features could be discerned. Watching it, she felt the same weight in her chest she had felt that first night, the sense that something vast was studying them in return. The silhouette footage became a point of fixation for researchers, but for Anita, it was something far worse, a confirmation that what had been circling their property had form and intent. Frame-by-frame analyses circulated among cryptozoology circles, showing what appeared to be a bipedal figure of immense proportion with an unnatural gait. She watched those frames repeatedly, noting how the creature seemed to pause and turn toward the camera before the image collapsed into static, as though it had known it was being observed. Anita's documentation changed with that realization. Her once clinical notes, precise and organized, began to unravel into chaotic bursts of handwriting. The early entries were still careful: times, durations, temperature readings, notes about light and sound direction. By mid-June, her writing had become fragmented and urgent, whole lines underlined in heavy strokes, some entries reduced to single declarative phrases written in all capitals, the handwriting trembling with exhaustion and dread. The entry, dated June 14th, stood out most starkly in her own recollection. "It knows we're watching. The sounds are getting closer." Maya drew another picture. Today, how does she know what it looks like? She had not intended to write in that tone, but by then she said that her thoughts had ceased to feel like her own. Maya's sketches were growing disturbingly detailed. Anita noticed the anatomical precision in her daughter's depictions. The elongated limbs, the vast chest, the strange curvature of the shoulders. The eyes in the drawings seemed to hold the page, pale and deliberate, as if some shared vision had guided the pencil. Maya had never seen the creature directly, yet her renderings captured something that made Anita's stomach tighten whenever she looked too long. Anita began to believe the creature was asserting itself, responding to their presence. It moved with deliberation, leaving signs and signals that felt territorial. The Gray Wolf property had become the center of a confrontation decades in the making, and Anita sensed they were now a part of whatever unfinished pattern the valley had been holding. By June 13th, the boundary between observation and participation had dissolved completely. They were no longer witnesses. They were being engaged. The rhythmic pounding that had once seemed distant now shook the entire structure, causing light fixtures to sway and glass to hum in the window panes. Electrical power failed in unison with the pounding, as though each impact drained the air and current at once. The darkness that followed was total, broken only by the pulse of sound surrounding the house in coordinated patterns. But how could something that large perform those without leaving tracks? Her skepticism collapsed quietly rather than dramatically. She now slept on the couch facing the entryway, a claw hammer resting beside her. She positioned herself between the door and Maya's room, sleeping only in short intervals, ears trained on every shift in the wind. Each thud outside felt calculated, as if the thing circling them was not just testing boundaries, but studying them. Maya changed with the pattern of nights. She spoke less, drew more. Her notebooks filled with sequences of the same towering figure, sometimes at the edge of the woods, sometimes half obscured by branches, always turned toward the house. Her focus became unnervingly precise. She would stay awake for hours sketching in silence, her pencil tracing shapes Anita could almost hear. When the wildlife biologists arrived, Anita's hope returned for the first time in weeks. A 3-person team from the Department of Conservation, led by Dr. Ellis Crane, set up on her porch, their confidence measured and professional. Maya recorded the session for her project, while Anita presented her notes, her tone steady as she explained each incident. The destroyed coop, the stripped trees, the symmetrical animal carcasses. She placed her journal before them, offering data she had spent sleepless nights compiling, hoping science might impose structure on the chaos. The scientists' response struck her harder than the knocking ever had. Their calm detachment felt rehearsed. Dr. Crane mentioned isolation hysteria, describing how sensory deprivation could distort perception. His colleague, Dr. Leora Vance, spoke of bacterial infections and environmental contamination, though she admitted that all samples tested clean. Their dismissal of the electromagnetic failures drew the faintest smile from Crane, as though the notion itself insulted his expertise. To Anita, the condescension felt colder than disbelief. That night, their team established a base camp half a mile from the Gray Wolf house. Anita watched their lights fade behind the trees, the equipment glinting under the beam of their headlamps. Motion sensors, infrared rigs, field recorders, electromagnetic detectors arranged with precision and purpose. They moved with the confidence of people who still believed the world was explainable. At 2:30 in the morning, Anita awoke to the sound of static from her handheld radio, followed by a burst of overlapping transmissions. The interference grew dense, layered with low-frequency vibrations that made the walls tremble. Later reports confirmed that the biologists' instruments had all triggered at once: motion sensors, EMF readers, and infrared cameras detecting massive simultaneous movement within a 200-yard radius. The last thing Anita heard before the transmission died was Dr. Crane's voice, distorted by interference, describing something enormous moving between their tents. The signal dissolved into a roar of white noise, leaving the radio silent in her hands. At dawn, tribal police and emergency teams reached the scientists' camp. Anita saw the overturned field truck before they did, half sunk into the clearing. The vehicle had been flipped onto its roof, the frame collapsed inward as though pressed by unimaginable weight. The metal bore deep, rounded impressions, marks that no known tool or natural event could explain. Standing in the wreckage's shadow, Anita understood that whatever had come for them was still nearby, and that its interest had not faded with the night. The 3 biologists were found unconscious but uninjured approximately 100 yards from their destroyed vehicle. Anita never saw the moment they were discovered, only the aftermath, their faces pale under the emergency floodlights, their movements sluggish and uncertain. They had been lucky, she thought, though none of them looked it. All 3 suffered from mild hypothermia and temporary memory loss, unable to recall anything beyond the stroke of midnight. Their expensive scientific equipment was strewn across the forest like discarded bones, some pieces embedded in tree trunks 20 feet above ground, as if thrown there by impossible force. Dr. Crane's infrared camera, retrieved by deputies, had captured 47 seconds before dying. Anita watched the playback on a deputy's tablet, numb as the thermal image revealed a towering bipedal shape crossing the campsite at 1:11 in the morning. 8, maybe 9 feet tall. Its heat signature fluctuated strangely, pulsing in uneven waves that no one could explain. She thought of the rhythmic knocking on her own walls, of the heavy breath she sometimes swore she could feel through the floorboards. The creature's heat map glowed and then vanished, replaced by static. Dr. Crane refused to return to Hollow Valley afterward. Anita read his report days later, a single sterile paragraph recommending that the area be closed to researchers. No one mentioned what else might live there. The silence that followed was worse than ridicule. It was abandonment. Back at the Gray Wolf house, the fallout from the scientists' retreat pressed down like a physical weight. Anita understood finally that no one would help them. The decision to leave was immediate, but Maya's plea for one more day, just one more recording, cut deep. She said she was close to proving it existed. Anita had no words left to argue. Against everything maternal in her, she agreed to stay. That night, the smell grew unbearable. It wasn't rot anymore, but something acidic, almost manufactured, seeping through the walls until their eyes burned. Anita sealed every window, dragged furniture against the doors, and refused to step outside. Even the dogs seemed hollowed out, lying together in silence, their ribs trembling with each breath. The air inside the house felt heavy, charged with the same pressure that came before lightning. She could feel it watching, waiting. By June 15th, the valley had turned hostile. Weather alerts warned of severe electrical storms and potential tornadic activity, but Anita barely heard them. She spent the day packing methodically, forcing her hands to move even as static hissed through every device. Radios spat nonsense, cell signals dissolved into bursts of interference. The air smelled of metal. When the storm hit at 9:37, it sounded like the sky tearing apart. Lightning strobed through the windows, each flash revealing the motionless dogs, the trembling curtains, the outline of the forest beyond. At 9:47, the grid failed. Darkness swallowed the property. Then came the knocking, not the scattered taps of previous nights, but a full assault, measured, powerful, deliberate. The house shuddered as though gripped by unseen hands. Anita felt the floor flex beneath her feet, dishes clattering from shelves, window panes vibrating in rhythm. Somewhere deep inside the structure, something answered each strike with a groan of wood under strain. She grabbed the phone, fighting static, her voice barely rising above the noise. The dispatcher would later note the time, 9:47 and 32 seconds, and the garbled fragments of what she said. The connection pulsed with distortion, each syllable smeared by interference. Anita remembered hearing movement in Maya's room and a heavy step outside, close, circling. The power surged once, flickered, and died. Then that freight train sound roared overhead, a force of wind or something else pressing against the walls. She tried again to speak. The voice that emerged didn't sound like hers. She said something was shaking the house, that Maya was inside, that it was here. The call ended abruptly. Dispatch marked it at 9:49 and 4 seconds, when lightning hit the ridge, blinding white and final. By the time rescuers arrived after midnight, the storm had broken. The door hung open, rain sweeping through the rooms. Furniture lay overturned, glass scattered like salt. Anita's awareness of that night would later fracture into fragments. The smell of ozone, the static still humming in her teeth, and the silence that followed. Outside, they found the tracks, Maya's small footprints running from the porch into the woods, pressed deep into the mud, as though each step had been forced by something close behind. The stride length made no sense for a child. Anita would replay that image forever, those tiny prints vanishing into the trees, chased by something that left only enormous symmetrical impressions on the earth. The search dogs refused to follow. They approached the ridge, then froze, whining and trembling until their handlers dragged them back. Whatever waited beyond that line, even the animals understood they were not meant to cross. The trail ended at a rocky outcropping half a mile from the house, and Anita knew the search was over long before anyone said it. Maya's footprints simply stopped, pressed deep into the soft earth, and then gone, as if the ground itself had swallowed her. There were no signs of a fall, no scuff marks, no drag lines. The larger impressions, the ones that followed, continued for another 50 yards before vanishing on hard stone. She studied the ground until her vision blurred, unable to understand how something that heavy could stop leaving tracks. The official search expanded quickly after that. Helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating over the valley, while search teams spread through the forest with bright vests and radios that crackled through static. 50 volunteers joined in, calling her daughter's name over and over into the trees. The sound echoed strangely, as if the valley itself refused to return it. For 6 days they searched, through rising heat, rain, and the chemical smell that seemed to linger even after the storm passed. No one found a single trace of Maya beyond that ridge. When the state officials arrived with their reports and explanations, their words barely registered. They said the storm had caused disorientation. They said the terrain was dangerous and that Maya must have fallen somewhere unseen. Anita listened but felt detached from everything, like the conversation was taking place in another room. On June 21, 2015, the search was officially ended. The paperwork said, "Death by misadventure," but Anita could still smell the sour electricity in the air and the damp soil where the prints had stopped. After the searchers left, the silence of Hollow Valley grew unbearable. Anita stayed behind, unable to leave the ridge where the trail ended. She built a small camp from what remained of their supplies, a plastic tarp and the remnants of the storm shelter. Locals later said they saw her wandering at dawn, moving quietly among the trees, keeping watch as if waiting for something to return. She marked each passing night by the sound of distant knocking that no one else seemed to hear. The cold didn't matter. The hunger didn't matter. The ridge had become the last place her daughter existed, and she couldn't abandon it. 3 weeks later, she was found by a county patrol officer, dehydrated and barely conscious. They said she resisted evacuation, insisting she needed to stay where the ground broke off. She was transported to Eastern State Hospital in Veneta, placed under observation in a quiet ward with sealed windows and soft lighting. Investigators visited her frequently in those first days, hoping to piece together what had happened in the woods, but her answers only deepened their confusion. The diagnosis was written in careful medical language, acute stress reaction with psychotic features, but the doctors never understood what she had seen or what she was still listening for at night when she refused to sleep. 5 years passed before anyone found anything tangible. In the summer of 2020, hikers moving through an unmarked section of Hollow Valley discovered skeletal remains scattered near a dry creek bed, over a mile from where the original search had ended. The bones were light, almost bleached by time, and the earth around them had hardened into pale clay. DNA confirmed what Anita had already known since the night of the storm. The remains belonged to Maya Graywolf. The announcement brought no comfort, only the final confirmation that the valley had taken her child and then returned her as proof. The official record lists the case as unresolved, death by misadventure, circumstances undetermined. The language is cautious, bureaucratic, meant to close a file. But the evidence remains. Those impossible tracks, the magnetic interference, the shape burned into a camera's memory. In Anita's mind, the valley still breathes. What happened there was never meant to be explained by the kind of people who write reports.